It began like any other morning on base. The sky still wore its pre-dawn haze. Reveille drifted across the compound, distant, routine. Boots hit the pavement in rhythm. Orders passed in low voices. Life on the base ran like a machine, except for one figure who moved outside its gears. An old man in coveralls, gray-haired and hunched, swept leaves near the flagpole. No nameplate, no insignia, just gloves, a mop, and a silence that blended into the background. He'd been there for years. Everyone saw him. No one noticed him. Until today. A black sedan tore into the courtyard, tires screeching like sirens. Doors flung open. Out stepped the base admiral, chest lined with honors, eyes sharp with purpose. He walked past officers, past salutes, straight to the janitor. Then paused, and raised his hand in salute. Everything stopped. Conversations died. Movements froze. Even the flag seemed to hang still in the air. Why? Who was this man? No one could explain it. But by sundown, every soul on that base would know his name, and wonder how they ever missed the story beneath their feet. Where are you watching from? Subscribe now, because the truth behind this moment is only just beginning. His name was Ellis. No one called him Mr. No one called him anything, really, just the janitor. He'd been on base for 11 years. Showed up every morning before the sun touched the gates, disappeared just after last call. Never late, never idle, always moving, always cleaning. But there was something else about him, something you couldn't sweep away with a broom. He never smiled, never complained, spoke only when spoken to, and even then, just enough to be polite. Most assumed he was just old, tired, a man counting down the years until he vanished for good. But if you looked closely, you'd see something different in his eyes, something alert, watchful. He didn't just mop the floors, he watched the base. Quietly, constantly. Around him, the base buzzed with rank and routine. Drill sergeants barked at recruits. Jets screamed overhead. Orders moved through radios with surgical precision. This was a world built on noise, on hierarchy, on motion. And yet Ellis moved through it like a shadow. No one remembered when he'd started. Not really. Records said he was cleared. Background checks came back clean. But nobody ever asked where he'd come from. Or why he always seemed to pause near the training fields, mop in hand, gaze locked on the new recruits like a man measuring more than dust. Some laughed behind his back. Ghost with a mop, they called him. Others made small talk, out of politeness or boredom. He answered with nods, short replies, maybe a dry chuckle. But if you tried to get personal, ask about family, past service, anything deeper, he'd gently steer the conversation back to the weather or the stain on your boot. It wasn't rudeness. It was precision, like a man trained to avoid attention without raising suspicion. His presence became part of the scenery, as invisible as the wind between buildings, yet as constant. He knew every hallway, every shortcut, every broken hinge before it squeaked. He never asked for help, never called in sick. Some said they'd seen him standing still in the darkened gym after hours, just standing, as if listening to memories no one else could hear. There was nothing dramatic about him. No outbursts, no secrets revealed. But something didn't fit, and the longer he stayed, the more people quietly wondered. Why did he never take vacations? Why did he flinch ever so slightly when helicopters passed too low? Why did he keep watching that drill instructor like he recognized the way he shouted? These weren't the kinds of questions you voiced aloud. Not on a military base where rules mattered more than rumors. And besides, no one wanted to admit it. But Ellis unsettled them. Not in a dangerous way. In the way a locked door unsettles you, when you're not sure whether something's being kept out or being kept in. He was a ghost with a mop. And for 11 years, no one looked past the bucket. Until the day the bucket didn't matter anymore. It happened in less than 10 seconds. And yet, for everyone who witnessed it, time fractured. The black sedan had barely come to a stop before the Admiral stepped out. His stride was sharp, shoulders squared, eyes cutting through the morning fog like radar. Officers scattered instinctively, snapping to attention. Conversations ended mid-sentence. The air itself seemed to tighten. No one understood why he was heading toward the flagpole. There was no ceremony scheduled. No dignitaries arriving. Just Ellis, sweeping leaves beside the walkway, the same as he had every morning for more than a decade. But the Admiral didn't glance at the building. He didn't scan the parade grounds. His eyes were locked, directly, unwaveringly, on the janitor. And then the unthinkable. He stopped, raised his right hand. and saluted. Gasps weren't audible, but they were felt. A ripple of disbelief passed like shock through the assembled ranks. Second lieutenants froze mid-stride. A gunnery sergeant blinked twice, unsure if he was hallucinating. Even the XO, rigid and unforgiving, turned his head, subtle but sharp, trying to comprehend what he'd just seen. You don't salute janitors. That's not how it works. A salute in military culture isn't a greeting. It's a recognition of service, of sacrifice, of standing within the sacred chain of command. It's earned through battle, blood, and years that don't come back. And the man giving the salute? Admiral Thomas K. Reardon was not the kind of officer who made mistakes. He was a by-the-book tactician. No room for sentiment. No margin for error. And yet here he stood, saluting the man with the mop. Ellis didn't return the gesture. He didn't shift. Didn't speak. He simply looked up, eyes steady, mouth neutral, and gave the Admiral a slow, solemn nod. It wasn't disrespect. It was something else. Something older than protocol. A private language between men who've seen too much to need words. The silence lingered long after the Admiral lowered his hand and walked away. Training drills were delayed. Recruits stared. Some whispered. Most didn't dare. Because that one moment, so quiet, so still, had violated something unspoken. Not a rule exactly, but a reality. A truth everyone thought they understood. And now, it bent under the weight of something they couldn't name. What did it mean? Why did the Admiral do it? And who was Ellis, really? No one said it aloud, but they all felt it. This was not a random gesture. It was a message. A signal. And it wasn't for them. It was between two men who knew something the rest didn't. From that moment forward, Ellis wasn't invisible anymore. He was a question. And on that base, where order reigned and questions were dangerous, that made him more visible than ever before. By noon, the salute was legend. Not rumor, legend. It echoed in every corner of the base. In the mess hall, recruits whispered over trays of lukewarm potatoes. In the officers' lounge, captains traded glances mid-conversation, trying not to seem curious. Even among civilian contractors, the question kept surfacing. Why Ellis? Why now? It wasn't just gossip. It was disruption. Military culture thrives on certainty. Chains of command. Predictable behavior. Every salute, every order, every protocol builds a wall against chaos. But that wall had just cracked, because a man no one understood had just been acknowledged by someone who understood everything. And now, people were remembering. Little moments, brushed off at the time, began resurfacing like fragments of a dream. A burst pipe in the engineering wing. Ellis had cut the power before the alarm went off. A fire in the kitchen. He'd pulled 2 recruits out before the flames breached the hallway. No panic. No hesitation. Just decisive movement from a man no one thought could move quickly at all. And then there was that moment last year, when a fresh recruit stood on the edge of the roof, shaking, silent. It was Ellis who found him. No one knew what he said. But 10 minutes later, the kid climbed down and walked himself to counseling. People started asking, how does a janitor know where to stand in a crisis? The story grew legs. A young ensign, fresh out of the academy, sharp, skeptical, took it personally. He started digging. Quietly. Nights in the records room, days scanning personnel files. But no matter where he looked, there was nothing. No birth certificate. No high school. No military service. Not even a driver's license before he joined the maintenance staff. As far as the government was concerned, Ellis didn't exist until 11 years ago. It didn't make sense. And in a place built on clearance levels and data trails, not making sense was dangerous. Tension crackled across the base. Every time Ellis entered a room, conversations shifted. Recruits stood straighter. Officers paused mid-sentence. Not out of respect, but out of caution. Like animals sensing a presence they couldn't name. He hadn't changed. He still pushed his mop in long, even strokes. Still nodded when spoken to. Still moved like someone carrying a weight no one else could see. But everything around him had changed. He was no longer invisible. He was an enigma wrapped in uniform gray, unlabeled, untraceable, unforgettable. And the more people whispered, the more the myth grew. Was he a ghost from Black Ops? A witness in hiding? A relic from a mission, so buried it never made it into the logs? No one had answers. Only questions. And in the world of military secrets, questions are the most dangerous thing of all. The deeper the young ensign searched, the more blank walls he hit. Digital files had nothing. Paper archives were scrubbed. Even old maintenance rosters had been quietly reformatted over the years. Ellis didn't exist, not before his janitorial entry badge was issued. No service record, no background history, no past. But sometimes the truth survives where no one looks. Down in an old sub-basement, beneath layers of forgotten supply crates and yellowing boxes, the ensign found it, tucked inside a rusted cabinet marked inactive. A charred manila folder, half melted at the corners. The paper inside was brittle, warped by heat, but real. A personnel file. No name on the tab. No photo. Just page after page of black lines. Redactions so thick, they swallowed entire paragraphs. And yet, buried among the censorship, one line had escaped the blackout. Operation Iron Vessel, high-value asset, Echo 1. The ensign froze. It meant nothing, and everything. Iron Vessel. Echo 1. The words rang with classified weight, military code speak for something buried deep. Something dangerous. Something so secret, even the phrasing was meant to mislead. And that title, high-value asset. Not personnel. Not operative. Asset. Ellis wasn't just someone who served. He was something they used. But used for what? The ensign read further. What wasn't redacted was cryptic, a list of unnamed coordinates. A decommission date with no year. Mentions of containment breach risk. But no location. No unit. No chain of command. Whatever Operation Iron Vessel had been, it wasn't ordinary black ops. It was off-book. Deep shadow. The kind of thing no one admitted existed, because it legally couldn't. And Ellis? He was Echo 1. The first. Maybe the only. The ensign put the file down, heart racing. He knew enough about clearance levels to recognize when something crossed into illegal territory. This wasn't just classified. It was erased intentionally. And if someone had tried to destroy this file, but failed, that meant someone had wanted him forgotten. But someone else had made sure a trace remained. The file shouldn't have existed. It shouldn't have survived the fire damage, the reclassification, the endless bureaucratic purges. But here it was, and it pointed to one terrifying truth. Ellis wasn't lost in the system. He was hidden from it. Questions crashed like waves. What had Ellis done? Why was he labeled an asset? And why had an admiral, known for his ruthless loyalty to protocol, chosen that exact morning, that exact moment, to break military form and salute a man who wasn't supposed to exist? It was no longer just a mystery. It was a puzzle with missing pieces, designed to mislead. The base still whispered. But now, the ensign knew more than a rumor. He knew a name. Echo 1. And once a name is known, silence becomes impossible. The puzzle began to take shape, not through files, but through people. The young ensign, driven by questions no one else dared ask, eventually found someone who remembered. An old chief petty officer, long retired, who had once served in places even maps wouldn't mark. He was reluctant, guarded, but after hearing the word Echo 1, his face changed. He didn't ask where the ensign heard it. He just sat down and began to talk. Ellis, he said, had once worn a different name, one not spoken anymore. He wasn't just Navy. He was deep-end classified, the kind of operative used when negotiations failed and deniability was required. He didn't operate with units. He was the unit. His missions were quiet insertions into black sites buried in hostile territory. Covert rescues of assets the government wouldn't admit existed. Retrievals from places where no help was ever expected. He carried no identification, left no paper trail. And when he completed an objective, there was no debrief. No photo ops. No recognition. Just a phrase in whispered circles. Echo 1's been through. He was called Echo, not because of sound, but because he left none. No aftermath. No evidence. No failures. Until one mission changed everything. The details were still classified, even for the chief. But what slipped through was this. 6 American POWs were pulled from a hellhole compound in a remote corner of eastern terrain. Alive. Rescued against impossible odds. But Ellis didn't come back with a team. Because the rest of his unit didn't make it. Some said it was betrayal. Others an ambush. Maybe a setup. But Ellis, Echo 1, had been the one who walked out. Carrying injuries. Carrying survivors. And carrying silence. He refused all honors. Command tried to give him a medal. He mailed it back. They offered promotion. He declined flatly. He requested one thing, to disappear. Not dishonorably. Not in hiding. Just gone. He wanted to live among the living. But outside the noise. And that's exactly what he did. He shaved off the past. Adopted a role no one would question. No eyes. No attention. Just a janitor. On a base where the rhythms were familiar, the voices distant, and the work, mundane, physical, was enough to quiet the ghosts. He chose invisibility not to run from pain, but to survive it. And suddenly, everything made sense. The way he moved through the base like he knew it better than anyone. The instincts. The silence. The gaze that seemed to measure more than space. Even the salute. Because Admiral Reardon hadn't saluted a janitor. He'd saluted a man who once carried the lives of others through the fire and asked for nothing in return. For the first time, Ellis wasn't a mystery. He was a man who had vanished, not out of fear, but out of choice. He had seen war, commanded fleets, buried friends, decorated walls lined his office, medals, citations, photographs with presidents. But none of it meant more than a memory he'd never spoken aloud. A memory sealed in sweat, mud, and silence. It was 20 years ago. A black site extraction gone wrong. 6 American operatives held in a jungle prison that wasn't supposed to exist. The rescue team? Wiped out. Radios dead. Hope vanished. Reardon, then a young lieutenant, was barely conscious. Ribs broken. Infected wound in his leg. No food. No water. The men around him were dying one by one. The mission was a ghost, until one night, out of the darkness, came him. They never saw his face clearly. Just a figure, fast and precise. Gunfire that seemed to come from nowhere. A hand dragging them out, one at a time. Reardon passed out in the mud. He woke up being carried. For 9 miles through thick jungle, across rivers and mine-ridden paths, Ellis never stopped. He broke a fever with river water and tree bark. Sutured a leg wound with fishing line. Whispered nothing. Demanded nothing. Just moved, focused on survival. When the evac chopper arrived, Reardon was the only one strong enough to crawl inside. The others were alive, but barely. And Ellis? Gone. No report. No after-action debrief. Just vanished. Reardon spent years trying to track him. Requests were denied. Records sealed. Eventually, he stopped asking. He thought maybe Ellis had died, lost in some foreign soil. Or maybe, he hoped, Ellis had found peace, wherever peace was possible. And then 11 years later, it happened. Reardon was being transferred to a new command. A base he'd visited a dozen times, never long enough to notice the background. Until one morning, jet-lagged, coffee in hand, he saw a man sweeping leaves near the flagpole. The gait was slower, hair grayer. But Reardon knew. You don't forget the man who carried your life through hell. He watched for a week. Never spoke. Just observed. Ellis never looked up. Never gave any sign of recognition. Until the morning Reardon stepped from his sedan, crossed the pavement, and offered the only language a soldier understands without words. A salute. Not out of duty. Not for show. But for honor. It was a tribute to the man who gave everything and asked for nothing. A signal, not to command, but to acknowledge. That moment, frozen in silence, meant more than medals ever could. Because Reardon wasn't saluting a janitor. He was saluting the reason he was alive. And Ellis, as always, offered no ceremony in return. Just a nod. As if to say, that's enough. And for both men it was. Ellis never spoke of what he'd done. Not once. Not to a superior. Not to a curious recruit. Not even to those who owed him their lives. It wasn't secrecy. It was principle. He believed that real service, the kind that costs more than it gives, should never require applause. The moment you needed recognition for sacrifice, in his eyes, you'd already forgotten why you gave anything at all. There was no bitterness in him. Just gravity. Like a man who understood the weight he carried, and had chosen to carry it alone. Those who worked closest to him, fellow janitorial staff, a few quiet clerks, began to notice little details. Things that didn't quite match the role he played. A locked locker, even though no one ever touched his things. Inside, it wasn't supplies. It was memory. 7 photos. Old, sun-faded. Tucked into the corner of the metal wall, as if pinned there by ritual. Each face bore the same patch on their shoulder, the same silent bond. These were the men who hadn't made it out. His team. And every first Monday of the month, without fail, Ellis would visit the tiny post office just off base. He never spoke more than a word to the clerk. But he always carried 7 envelopes. The names on them varied. Different last names, different towns, different states. But the return address never changed. Each letter contained a small cashier's check. A modest amount. No notes. But those who received them knew. They were the mothers, the wives, the sons of the ones who didn't come home. Ellis never claimed to be a hero. He never called in favors. Never leaned on the weight of what he'd done. But he had one rule. Remember them. Not me. It was the reason he stayed in janitorial work. The reason he kept sweeping the same sidewalk every morning. It wasn't punishment. It was penance. A way to stay grounded, to stay quiet, to live among the living while honoring the dead. He had once told a chaplain, offhand, in passing, that the noise of praise was louder than any battlefield. And if he let it in, even once, he might lose the silence he needed to hear the voices of the fallen. Those voices were his compass. They guided his footsteps, shaped his discipline. They were why he never raised his voice, why he never showed anger, why he never accepted the medals others would have demanded. Because for Ellis, silence wasn't emptiness. It was loyalty. It was remembrance. And when the Admiral saluted that morning, when the base stood still and the questions began swirling, Ellis never broke character. Never explained. Because explaining would have taken away what that moment was meant to protect. Not his story, but theirs. It began as a ripple. After the Admiral's salute, after the whispers turned to questions and questions turned to research, word reached higher up. Not through formal channels. Through silence. A retired general made a call. A clerk connected the dots. A classified citation, previously sealed under Operation Iron Vessel, was quietly reopened at the Pentagon. A commendation buried for over 2 decades resurfaced. Not for the sake of policy, but for closure. They planned the ceremony in secret. Base command was careful. No press. No announcements. Just an internal notice. Mandatory base assembly, 1,300 hours, main auditorium. Ellis wasn't told directly. No one dared approach him with an invitation. He swept the sidewalks that morning like any other. Took his lunch alone, sitting on the edge of the mess hall loading dock, watching the horizon. At 12:55, the auditorium was packed, every rank present. Officers in full dress. Recruits in pressed fatigues. Civilian staff standing in the back. Silent. Waiting. His name was called once over the intercom. He didn't appear. Twice. Still no sign. A third time, and the silence deepened. Then, just before the speaker moved on, the back doors creaked open. No spotlight. No dramatic entrance. Just Ellis. Still in his janitor uniform. Gloves tucked in one pocket. Head down. Shoulders square. He walked slowly. Not to delay. Not to dramatize. Just steady. As he stepped into view, something remarkable happened. The Admiral stood. And one by one, every person in that auditorium followed. Not on command. On instinct. 1,000 salutes rose in unison. No music. No orders. No applause. Just the sound of a man walking through the space where protocol gave way to something older. Something deeper. Respect. He stopped near the front, but didn't step on stage. Didn't reach for the podium. He simply nodded to the Admiral, then turned toward the sea of salutes. He held their gaze, not with pride, but with clarity. He was not here for ceremony. He was here because his absence would have said more than his presence ever could. The Admiral took the citation, leather-bound, lined with gold foil. Official. Heavy. He extended it toward Ellis. Ellis didn't take it. Instead, he looked to the crowd, then back at the Admiral, and nodded once more. It was enough. The Admiral lowered the citation. No one moved. No one lowered their arms. And slowly, Ellis turned and walked out the same way he came. No fanfare. No speech. But something had changed. His footsteps didn't echo, but they were heard. He didn't speak, but he was understood. And for the first time, the man who lived in silence was met with a silence that meant something. Not avoidance, but reverence. Not obedience, but legacy. Ellis didn't say goodbye. 1 week after the ceremony, he was gone. No formal retirement request. No farewell lunch. Just an empty locker, a folded uniform, and a neatly placed envelope. Inside was a single note, handwritten in firm, unshaken lines. Teach them honor, not glory. No signature. But none was needed. By then, everyone on base knew who had written it. Not just the name, but the weight behind it. The kind of weight you feel in your bones, not in your ears. A legacy not shouted, but lived. There was no forwarding address. No pension transfer. No trace of where he went. Like the missions he'd once been sent on, Ellis vanished the way only he could, quietly, deliberately, completely. But something remained. The mop. The same battered tool he'd used for over a decade now stood, mounted in a glass case outside the base's central training hall. Not as a joke, not as novelty, but as a symbol. A reminder that real strength doesn't announce itself. It watches. It listens. It moves when needed, and disappears when done. The young ensign, now a commissioned officer, took over Ellis's old route voluntarily. Once a week, before sunrise, he walked the sidewalks with that same quiet rhythm. Not to clean, but to remember. To understand. It became a ritual. A grounding. Because Ellis hadn't left medals behind. He'd left questions. Standards. A mirror to measure yourself against when no one's watching. Some would call him a ghost. Others a hero. But to those who truly understood, Ellis was something rarer. He was a man who never let identity outweigh integrity. Who believed that doing good meant never needing credit. That legacy wasn't about being remembered. It was about changing the way others remember themselves. And that's exactly what he did. Without a word. Without a title. Without ever needing to be seen. Life on base returned to routine. The drills resumed. New recruits marched in tight lines. Orders barked. Sirens tested. Steel doors clanged open and shut with familiar force. Time, as always, moved forward. But something lingered. Not loudly. Not obviously. Just present. In the corner of the mess hall, opposite the windows, just above the vending machines, hung a portrait. Framed in plain wood. No ceremony, no caption. Just a photograph. A janitor. Standing alone. Mop in hand. Eyes soft but steady. Some of the new recruits never noticed it at first. Just a photo, like the dozens lining the walls. Until someone pointed it out. Told them the story. The real story. The one that didn't come from a manual or a medal count. The one that could only be passed from voice to voice. And once they knew, they never looked at that portrait the same way again. Every Sunday, without fail, the Admiral walked in before breakfast rush. He didn't say much. Didn't stay long. But he always did the same thing. He removed his cover, the officer's hat worn with quiet dignity, and placed it gently on the table beneath the photo. A gesture without explanation. A tradition without an audience. But deeply understood. Because some legacies aren't carved in stone. They're carried in posture. Remembered in silence. And taught in the spaces between orders, where character grows without spotlight. In time, the photo came to mean something deeper. Not just a man with a mop, but a reminder of what's too easily overlooked. That greatness isn't always loud. It doesn't always walk into rooms wearing stars or stripes. Sometimes it walks hallways quietly. Listens. Watches. And waits for the moment it's needed most. Ellis never asked to be remembered. But those who almost never knew him never forgot. Because in the end, some heroes don't carry rank. They carry something heavier. And that's why giants, real giants, salute.